Welcome to Maintaining Your Collection, another module in the Collection Management Series, which is a State of Iowa Director Endorsement course for the State Library Certification Program. My name is Becky Heil, and I am the Southeast District Consultant and a member of the Continuing Education team for the State Library. Once again, we're going to talk about how collection development is at the heart of what libraries do. It is in being able to meet the needs of individuals with that right stuff that we fulfill our missions. That makes collection management a really important library function. Let's look again at the three major aspects described in the Director's Handbook. Developing policies for the collection. We talked about this in Collection Management 101. Budgeting for the collection. We're going to talk about that in this module. And the final piece, developing strategies for building, weeding, and maintaining your collection. We will talk about weeding in a completely separate module, but we'll look at some resources for building and maintaining the collection, as well as patron satisfaction. Let's start by identifying the types of collections you might have. Today, most libraries break their collection into at least three large categories: adult, young adult, and youth or children's. These are usually broken down further into fiction and nonfiction. Many libraries break their fiction down by genre, so they might have separate shelves for westerns, mysteries, or science fiction and fantasy. And of course, nonfiction is typically shelved by subject matter, whether that's Dewey Decimal or something else. We will be talking about that in the Cataloging and Access module. Your children's collection may be broken into several categories as well, like picture books, easy readers, juvenile fiction, graphic novels, and of course, nonfiction. You also probably have other collections you don't even think about as a collection, like downloadables. In Iowa, you can belong to a consortium called Bridges, which is made up of downloadable audiobooks, ebooks, magazines, and video. Today, there are many types of audiovisual materials available in libraries in a variety of formats. Think about movies, books on CD, and video games. You may have journals, newspapers, and popular magazines. Some of those may also be in digital format. And a library can also purchase streaming content like videos and music for their patrons. Other e-resources might include databases that you subscribe to. You may also have what we call special collections, like local history or genealogy. You will need to clarify what is included in those special collections, as well as understand the pros and cons of having them. Even more exciting today, many libraries are looking at completely non-print materials, like a library of things, where a patron can check out a cake pan, a pressure cooker, or a lawn edger. You may even have a collection of board games for checkout. Today, libraries are so much more than books. So, how do you decide how much money to spend on each of those collections? You'll want to assign a percentage of the library's operating budget for the purchase of library materials. A standard used to be 10 to 15% of your total budget, but over time that number has been given less importance. Let's say you decide to spend 12% of your budget for materials. We've already determined that there are a lot of types of materials or collections to spend money on. One way to think about it is, if fiction represents 20% of the collection, does it also represent 20% of the circulation? And does it represent 20% of your budget? What about picture books? They tend to be some of the highest circulating materials in a library, but frequently less money is spent on them. There are a number of factors that influence this, like the price of a picture book, but it is certainly something to think about during budget time. When we talked about balance in the first module, we talked about things like turnover rates and standing orders. For a small library, you may not have a line-by-line breakdown, but it can be very useful to take a look every so often and have some numbers in the back of your mind. What is the percentage of money you spend on adult materials versus children's materials? How about the difference in what you spend on digital versus print? And don't forget to think about what materials are your patrons actually using. Take a look at the size of your adult nonfiction collection and look at the circulating numbers compared to adult fiction. That can be very eye-opening. And don't forget to allot a certain amount for replacement, either due to theft or damage. Books do wear out. We talked a little bit about this in the first module, but you always need to be aware of how much that free donation actually costs. Don't forget about your time spent evaluating, processing, cataloging, weeding, and eventual disposal of those gifts. And there are other costs besides time involved with processing a book. And finally, remember, it does make a patron feel good to donate those books. Just make sure you let them know the best use of those materials might be for a book sale. Then you can use the money to buy something that's better suited to your collection. Although sometimes difficult to find, there are other funding alternatives, like monetary gifts, grants, friends, and foundations. However, if, as we said earlier, one of a library's biggest assets is its collection, it's important to remember to budget for that. There are competing selection philosophies, quality versus demand. These have been debated for a long time in the library profession and have complicated selection in public libraries. This debate pits selection based on customer preferences, which is demand, against selection based on quality content, which is quality. The demand argument says that because public libraries are funded by taxpayers, libraries should provide taxpayers with the types of materials they want. A collection based on demand may result in more bestseller reading materials and other materials that are heavily influenced by pop culture rather than classics. Some argue that this type of collection will draw people into the library since the library contains the type of materials that satisfy the community's interests. Then, once you have the citizens in the library, you can assist them in expanding their horizons if they're interested. The quality argument says that a public library should be a people's university, providing people with materials to help better themselves. In some senses, this is an artificial debate, since most public libraries are going to strive for a mix of the two selection philosophies. Your ultimate goal is to provide a balanced collection that meets the needs of your community. Collection assessment or collection mapping provides library administrators with a management tool for adapting the collection. It provides an internal analysis tool for planning, a tool to respond systematically to budget changes, and a communication tool and data for resource sharing with other libraries. Library staff can also benefit by having a better understanding of the collection, a basis for more selective collection development, again, improved communication with similar libraries, and enhanced professional skills in collection development. Now that we understand the why of collection analysis, let's move into what it is. Then we'll look at the how. What is it? It's an organized process for systematically analyzing and describing a library's collection. Maybe your assessment isn't formal, but you do probably do it. When planning a collection assessment project, it's important to define the goals of the program and then choose the most appropriate method to be used. Figure out what information is needed. An assessment can be fully comprehensive, or it could focus on specific areas depending on the library needs. It can be very tempting to gather all sorts of information because it seems really interesting, but that might be useless if it doesn't fit into the parameters of the project. Be sure that everyone participating in the assessment project understands what's expected and when tasks should be completed. The most important thing I ever learned about collection management is illustrated by this slide. Librarians and patrons have entirely different sets of resources in mind when they think about the library collection. There are three types of collections: the cataloged collection, that's librarian focused, the shelved collection, which is patron focused, and the in-use collection, which neither group can see. The cataloged collection is how you see your collection. It's the librarian selected collection. How you see it is illustrated on the left. A nice clean shelf with every book that you purchased on weddings on the shelf. The shelved collection is how your patron sees it. This is what they think your collection is. Maybe the best books on weddings are checked out right now, so all they see are the old and outdated ones and the gaps in your collection. Those gaps represent the collection in use, and that is actually the best evidence of what your patrons really want. Now that we agree we need to assess, there are lots of different ways to do it. Hopefully, some of you are using patron requests for collection development. It's kind of a new idea, but almost everyone is using it now. What about that collection in use? Do you regularly check your circulation records to see precisely what's going out? That's easy to know in a one-person library. It's harder to know if you don't work in circulation. Evaluation and assessment techniques fall into two broad categories: collection-centered in blue and client or user-centered in green. An effective assessment uses both types of techniques to gather two kinds of data. We want to look at quantitative data, which includes numbers, age, or use of statistics, and qualitative data, which might include observations by informed staff. The type of data useful for your particular evaluation depends on the library's purpose and mission. Some examples of the type of quantitative and qualitative data you can collect include the number of titles. You may have a manual or an automated shelf list count. It could be a physical count or an estimate of the titles from the shelves. You may want to count your acquisitions and expenditures, or the percent of each subject's yearly growth. An automated system can often provide detailed reports of this information. Your automated system can also give you reports on the age and timeliness of materials. You might want to look at the material's median or mean age, the range and distribution of publication dates. For example, while we will want to have some new editions of classic fairy tales with maybe award-winning illustrations, we may also want to keep some of the older editions and translations. But health materials that are older than 2 years are already out of date. We also want to look at use, one of those user-centered ways of assessing. We look at circulation statistics by type or by subject. We can look at interlibrary loan borrowing statistics in a particular subject area. All of the research shows that most of what's used in a public library is the newest material. Material that has not been used is increasingly less likely to be used in the future. You may want to look at per capita measures. How many titles or items do you have per community member? You will also want to look at the statistics involving your budget. Consider the relationships between the size of the collection, their usage, and how much of your budget is spent on them. Patron satisfaction. Using patron request statistics like holds, interlibrary loan, or request information is one way to tell if you have the items that patrons want on the shelves. Asking them directly at checkout or in a reader's advisory interview or through a survey is another way to get that data. And then examples of qualitative assessments. The percent of standard titles or items. This can be calculated by consulting best lists. Do you have the items on the list the high school students get for college prep, or from the New York Times bestseller list? Or compare with a library of your size to determine if you have any gaps. A diversity audit is a specific kind of shelf scanning to get at one specific goal. We'll talk about that later in the session. You can also do a general collection scan. This is shelf scanning by the librarian or observation by an outside expert or by a committee. Let's take a look at how we can use some of these techniques. To determine the turnover rate for the collection or a subject segment, run a report that tells you the total circulation for this segment. Using the total number of items, now you can easily establish the turnover rate for a 12-month period. If the section of the collection we're assessing is our adult mysteries, and we find that we have 1,000 titles with a mean age of 1973 and a 12-month circulation of 3,000, then we might consider giving more resources to this collection to increase its size because it's being heavily used with a turnover rate of 3. That might be 35% of the total adult fiction circulation, but it only represents 22% of the total collection size. This helps us understand that we might be needing to buy more mysteries and fewer of some other areas of adult fiction. This technique of scanning your collection or a certain segment is well suited to libraries of all sizes. It has the advantage of providing relevant information quickly, but direct examination should not be used as the sole assessment technique. Shelf scanning should be conducted after the statistical data has been collected. The data will complement your observations in the stacks. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the users. What do you see? What is the condition of the collection? Is it inviting? Is it ugly? Is it dirty? There are things that one can see when examining the collection in subject segments that are not easily understood by looking at the bibliographic records. We see the collection of cookbooks, football books, travel CDs, or whatever as the user sees them. We see the condition, the age, the extent, how many are actually available at a given time, not just how many the library has. And we can observe things like the presence of too many textbooks, or items with only black and white pictures, or items with no indexes. Deliberately and objectively doing shelf scanning of a collection in conjunction with some statistics generated by an automated catalog can provide the best type of information about your resources. Now comes the part that most librarians don't like, math. Hopefully, it's not as complicated as this formula. And just so you don't end up like this poor kid, let's start with a simple formula. The first question we need to ask is, where do you get comparative information from? And we'll take a look at that in a little bit. This is a simple spreadsheet that you can use to compare with other libraries. We'll take a look at where we can get those comparisons in the resources section. You can use it to benchmark against all kinds of things. You could use it to compare certain collections. What percentage of your adult fiction are you purchasing every year compared to what you spend on adult nonfiction? Or you can use it to compare to other libraries. What's our total holdings compared to the library down the street or someone across the country in a population the same size as us? Or you could use it to compare yourself to previous years. How many mysteries did we buy last year compared to what we've spent this year? Many of these calculations can also be used for your accreditation. In Section 4, Library Collections, the library determines its total annual circulation of library materials is one of the calculations you'll need to do. Let's take a look at this formula for just a little bit. In column A, you can see you can put either your library or the year that you're looking at it, or you could do a comparison of each of your collections. So line 1 might be mysteries, line 2 might be adult nonfiction, line 3 might be children's picture books. You're going to include the population for your community. You're going to include the total circulation for each of those specific collections or your library as a whole. You can also include your total holdings. How many mysteries do you have? How many juvenile easy picture books do you have? Then you're also going to want to add in column E, how many items did you purchase over the last year in that collection or for your library overall if you're comparing to someone else? Then you're going to look at the formulas in column F. We want to find out how many circulations per capita we have. How many books got checked out from that collection based on the number of population we have in our town. So you're going to take column C and divide it by column B, the total circulation divided by your your population, and that will give you your circ per capita. You can also see the formulas in each of the other columns. In column G, you'll find out the holdings per capita. In column H, you'll find out your turnover rate. And in column I, the estimated replacement rate. How much time will it take for you to replace every item in your collection if you purchase at the same rate that you're purchasing currently? For this, I use the Institute of Museum and Library Services information that's freely available on the web. When you fill out your annual survey, we at the State Library aggregate that information and send it to IMLS. They in turn aggregate all of the state's information and put it out for anyone to be able to use. So you can compare yourself again to the library down the street or to someone across the country. I used my friend Gail's library in Oneida in order to do some comparisons on this one. One of the things I would caution you, though, is the Institute for Museum and Library Services information is kind of old, so it's difficult to catch trends. We gather the data. Remember, it's due in October, but we don't always get everything until January. Then Scott sends the information to IMLS. They gather it from all over the country, and then they have to publish it. That whole process takes almost 2 years, which means this information is nearly 2 years old. But it's still a good way to compare yourself to other libraries. This spreadsheet looks very complicated. It was created by a retired regional consultant from Kansas named Chris Ripple. He uses formulas for a different kind of collection analysis. This is separate from benchmarking against yourself or against other libraries. It uses information about your collections, your circulation, and your titles added to suggest which portions of the collection should be weeded and which might be expanded. This free tool called Collection Analyzer uses your own automation reports to plug into this spreadsheet. We aren't going to go into all of the formulas here, but take a look at the last 3 columns. If you can see, items that are in red mean you might want to weed this collection or perhaps buy less of those. If that number is in green, that means it's a popular collection, so you might consider buying more or spending more money on that collection. This is just using formulas. It doesn't take any thought at all, but it can help you think about the impact on your budget. You can weed, yes, but what else could you do? Maybe you need to shift money around. This is another principle that I learned a long time ago. It's called the Pareto 80-20 rule. It's not from the library field, but there are many uses for it in libraries. Pareto's rule states that a small number of causes is responsible for a large percentage of the effect. What this might mean in terms of collections are 20% of your books account for 80% of your circulation. Or it might be something like 20% of Americans account for 80% of the reading is done. Think about what this means as you're looking at buying materials. This next slide talks about a shelf time study. This answers the question, how long does something sit on your shelf? The formula for this one isn't too complicated. You look at the number of circulations of each title over a certain time span. So maybe you had 100 circs in the first year. It drops to 20 in year 2 and less than 10 in year 3. By year 4, it's generally close to 0. This chart reflects the normal use pattern of an item in your collection. That means on average, 75% of the circulations of an item take place in that first year. It can drop to around 10% in the second year, and after the third year, you have negligible circulations. This has a huge impact on weeding, and this has been shown to hold true from library to library to library from many years ago when they first started collecting the information to up currently, this tends to be the way items are used. So think about that as you're looking at weeding your collections. Now let's talk a little about diverse collections. We're going to first look at an interpretation of the Library Bill of Rights. Collection development should reflect the philosophy inherent in Article 1 of the Library Bill of Rights. A diverse collection should contain content by and about a wide array of people and cultures to authentically reflect a variety of ideas, stories, and experiences. Library workers have an obligation to select, maintain, and support access to content on subjects by diverse authors and creators that meet, as closely as possible, the needs, interests, and abilities of all the people the library serves. This means acquiring materials to address popular demand and direct community input, as well as addressing collection gaps and unexpressed information needs. Library workers have a professional and ethical responsibility to be proactively inclusive in collection development and in the provision of interlibrary loan where offered. A well-balanced collection does not require a one-to-one equivalence for each viewpoint, but should strive for equity in content and ideas that take both structural inequalities and the availability of timely, accurate materials into account. A diverse collection should contain a variety of works chosen pursuant to the library's selection policy and subject to periodic review. Library workers must not permit their personal biases, opinions, or preferences to unduly influence collection development decisions. A diversity audit is a critical step in building truly representative collections, because no matter how well we think we are doing at this, our unconscious biases are getting in our way without us knowing. We may think we're building a representative collection, but we need concrete data to be sure. We want to build collections to be both a mirror, reflect the reader's experience, and a window, so readers can experience different experiences and points of view. In a diversity audit, you evaluate an existing collection to get hard numbers on how diverse your collection or service truly is. This can cover anything from seeing what percentage of your board books feature non-white characters to how many LGBTQ titles are written by own voices authors. This next quote is from a blog post by a children's librarian. She states, "In doing a diversity audit of my collection, my goal was to learn what percentage reflected something other than the experience of straight, white, non-disabled males, and to then fill in those gaps. I wanted to verify that I was doing a good job of transcending my worldview and internalized biases. I was not. Conducting a diversity audit made me look honestly at my collection development and forced me to step outside my comfort zone to accomplish the work I always claimed to be doing." Here's the process that one librarian used to complete a diversity audit. Step 1, research the community. She says, "I used census data and other statistical information to get a good picture on the populations in my K-5 community. Using tools like the US Census Bureau, I learned a lot about the racial breakdown of my community. Around 30% of my area's children aged 5 to 12 identify as white, followed by around 25% identifying as Asian, 20% as Latinx, 15% as mixed race, and 7% as Black. Please note, even if my area's population was not this diverse, it would still be incredibly important for our collection to be diverse. All children need to see diversity in their stories." Step 2, gather your data. This librarian then surveyed the collection, going through every book she brought to schools and charting the characters. She looked at whether they were human or animal, and whether they were clearly depicted as belonging to a particular race or ethnicity. She also charted LGBTQ+ characters, neuroatypical characters, and characters with disabilities. Then she went back and did it all again for the writers and the illustrators. Step 3, you want to compare your data sets. What she did in this one is discover that although only 30% of the community's children were white, more than 60% of the books in the collection featured white main characters. The next largest percentage? Books about non-human characters like animals and robots. We needed to improve our collection, and quickly, she said. Then comes the fun part, step 4, get new books. No surprise, she says, this was the best part. So she researched all kinds of diverse books. She got kids, staff, and volunteers to test read them. For each book, she looked at reviews that were written by a member of that culture or identity. She wanted to know if someone on the autism spectrum would find fault with a representation of an autistic character. She also used resources like We Need Diverse Books, American Indians in Children's Literature, and other lists of notable books and award winners. After that, she says, was everything fixed? No, of course not. Although we had increased diversity in that one collection, it was just one collection. Every other collection needed to be addressed as well. Now that everything is set up, you need to go through the list one book at a time, filling out an audit report. This is the how of how this person actually did their diversity audit. She used a variety of tools for it. She went through and filled out the ones she knew off the top of her head, like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. Then she went back to the top and worked her way down one at a time. You can see the author and the title are in the first two columns. Then she looked at things like, was it a white, straight character? Was the author white or straight? Was it a diverse author? Then she looked at biracial. She looked at Asian. Then she also looked at the main characters for each of those. This is a very time-consuming one. But there are many resources available for all aspects of collection management, including diversity audits. You'll find lots of information out there and available, and the State Library will be doing some work with that as well in the coming time. You'll find resources available for evaluating your materials, for purchasing, for analysis of the collection as a whole. Many of these are going to be available to you as a handout, but I do want to touch on just a few of the most important ones. We are going to talk about analyzing a little bit later, but here are the resources where you can compare with other public library collections. Using the Bibliostat Connect, which is where you fill out your annual survey, there's a portion of it called Connect. That's where you can look at libraries, again, all across the country that are gathering the same kinds of information that you're gathering. The State Library also publishes our Iowa Public Library Statistics book that you can get access to on the State Library website. This is another great way to compare yourself to Iowa libraries. We talked a bit about ways to determine what your library will have in its collection in the first collection management module. We do need to evaluate materials before purchase. So what resources are available to do that? For the next 5 slides, I'm going to look at some resources that are free, some are paid, some are a combination, some are print, and some are online or both. The first category is review magazines, standard bibliographies, and professional organizations. You can get information through a paid service like Gale Books and Authors, or Novelist, or the Wilson Standard Catalog series. Wilson has a series of books or databases broken down into the graphic novels core collection. It gives you a list of 4,000 titles, and it was published in 2020. So it tells you what are the best used graphic novels for your collection. Wilson also has a young adult fiction core collection that was published in 2017, and it includes 2,500 titles. Public Library Core Collections is for nonfiction titles. It was published in 2019, and it lists 12,000 titles that they feel are best for a core collection. You can also look at materials at magazines like Library Journal, School Library Journal, and Booklist. Although Library Journal is a subscription journal available both in print and online, it does have some good resources available free in its basic online resource. You can access book reviews from them online or even get pre-publication info sent to you via email notifications. BookPage is one of my favorite review sources because it's brief, inviting to view, and it seems to be what a lot of the public sees as well. Many libraries subscribe to multiple copies of BookPage, which is delivered in a newspaper-like format and can be distributed to patrons. It's a great PR service to provide free copies of it to your patrons. They will love it. And then also make sure a copy is available for staff because it makes a great collection development guide. It's a much cheaper cost than a subscription to some other sources like Publishers Weekly, which only generates one copy of the journal and can't be shared very well with your patrons and staff. Certainly, there are things that we have like standard bibliographies. Don't forget, you can borrow them from the State Library collection. There are over 300 library titles in Libraries Unlimited, Rowman and Littlefield, Neil Schumann, and ALA. Some examples are Marketing and Programming, a core collection of Spanish language materials. That's a Neil Schumann publication. Or The Librarian's Guide to Developing Christian Fiction Collections. That's also a Neil Schumann. ALSC, the Association for Library Service to Children, puts together a notables list every year. This division of the American Library Association issues an annual list of notable materials in book, film, audio, and software formats for children birth through age 12. It's usually released in January, immediately following the midwinter meeting. Also check award lists including the Newbery Award, the Caldecott, the Siebert, the Odyssey Award, and others. The American Library Association also puts together lists of notable books for adults. The Video Roundtable puts together a list of notable videos every year. And of course, YALSA for young adults, which is a division of the American Library Association, issues annual lists of notable materials in book, film, and audio formats for teens. The second category is vendor and publisher catalogs, especially their pre-publication items. Those include things like Publishers Weekly, or if you use the vendor Ingram, they have what they call the Ingram Advance. This gives you information about the books that are coming out in the next several months, so you get information ahead of when your patrons will. One of the things I like to use in many of these publisher or the vendor catalogs have to do with the statistics they provide you. They'll tell you in that catalog that Ingram ordered 1 million copies of this particular title. That gives you a clue of how much they think that's going to be in demand as the time goes on. So that's a good indication for you to buy multiple copies of those or make sure that it's something that you have on your shelf. Publishers like Simon & Schuster or Scholastic always have book reviews and pre-publication information on their websites. Publishers also do monthly book talks of new titles. It's a really nice break for you when you're looking for something a little easier than working on annual reports. You can tune in and just listen to publishers and authors talk about the new books that are coming out. The next category is what I call online professional sites. One of the ones I want to bring to your attention is called Fantastic Fiction. This is a site that provides series information in order. So the next time a patron comes in and asks, which of the Harry Potter books should I read next? You don't have to rack your brain. Just go to this site and voila, you have your answer in no time. This site can provide useful information for collection development if you realize that you only have 4 titles in your library of a collection that you know should include 6. Now you need to know which titles you're actually missing. Fantastic Fiction has the answer. As always, WebJunction has a plethora of good webinars and articles, including a section on building a diverse collection. The Diverse Book Finder is a comprehensive collection of children's picture books featuring Black and Indigenous people and people of color. They've cataloged and analyzed trade picture books fitting this criteria that have been published since 2002 and created an online searchable database that makes it easy to locate and explore children's picture books featuring characters with Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We Need Diverse Books is a 501c3 nonprofit and a grassroots organization of children's book lovers that advocate essential change in the publishing industry to produce and promote literature that reflects and honors the lives of all young people. I particularly like this one because it focuses on publishers. And don't forget, many of these have newsletters, podcasts, and webinars that you can tune into for more information. And of course, don't forget to check out other libraries. One of my favorite is What's Next from the Kent District Library. I just pulled up a couple of pages from Carnegie Stout in Dubuque and Bettendorf in Iowa that give personal recommendations based on the types of materials you like. They're always great places to go to look. Columbus Junction has a page on their website that talks about what their staff is reading and what they would suggest. There are also lots of online lists, not necessarily from professional librarian organizations, but from other places that you can trust. Things like NPR, the New York Times, or Book Riot. There are lots of published lists, like Oprah's list, and they have a vast assortment available. The American Library Association and magazines such as Library Journal, School Library Journal, and Book List also release their best of the year lists annually. Check those current lists to determine whether your collection is missing top quality or top popular items. Another one I'd like to bring to your attention is called the Large Hearted Boy blog. On his blog, he says, for the 13th straight year, I am aggregating every online year-end book list I find. As the lists appear, he adds them to his master list, updating them regularly. He has hundreds of best of lists on that one blog. It's a great place to go for information. And then the last category is online, and these are more public, not necessarily professional. It includes places like Amazon, Goodreads, and again, the Oprah Book Club. I have looked at these from time to time. You can look at the comments posted by users on Amazon. You can see not only what the professionals say about it, but also what the general public has to say about it. Those reviews do include snippets from professional journals and professional reviews, so those sites can be extremely useful. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't give credit to a few of the places I got my resources from. I want to give a special shout out to Roy Kanagi, former administrator of the Central Iowa District. He taught a 9-week course on collection development that I took in the 90s, and I still use his techniques today. Also, thanks to Chris Ripple, former administrator of the Central Kansas Library System, who put together the marvelous spreadsheets that are available for anyone to download and use. I also use the collection development training from the Arizona State Library and the ABLE courses on collections from the Idaho Commission for Libraries. This concludes the second module of collection management, maintaining your collection. Thanks for being part of the State Library of Iowa Director Endorsement Program. And don't forget, you can always call your district consultant for more information about this topic.